everyone, System Coral here, and today we're going to be on episode 2 of DID in the Media. Today's episode is going to be on What If It Works, which the full movie you can find on YouTube. So if you want to check that out, I am going to do a trigger warning because the movie does include CSA and it does include sex, and there is a bit of domestic violence in the film. So I'm going to talk about the things I like and some of the things that I really didn't like about it. The first thing is they were very subtle with alters. Subtle in the sense of it wasn't as dramatized as some media portrays it as. She did have some eccentric alters and some alters that were aggressive, but they weren't as serial killery or exceedingly flamboyant as media usually portrays them to be. They were really good with the sense of mental illness. They didn't demonize DID. They did have another sense of mental illness in it. The two protagonists is a teenager with DID and also another guy with obsessive compulsive disorder, a pretty severe case of OCD. And the plot line is those two have I believe the same psychiatrist, and it's more of a romance story about how they come together and accept each other's mental illnesses even though there was a struggle with them. There's not really any dangerous alters. There is an alter that can get aggressive in defense, and there's also a persecutor alter. But besides that, there's no alters that are homicidal, so to speak. It's a very hopeful story. It gives a lot of hope for finding a good relationship and navigating life with dissociative identity disorder, and on the flip side, obsessive compulsive disorder. And it also gives a lot of hope of being able to learn to manage it. There's no dramatic switches at all. When she did switch, it didn't look like anything. It just looked like she it was more immediate switches. So they weren't dramatized. It more looked like if she was herself, and then all of a sudden she acted like a different person, which is a lot more accurate to a lot of people's switches. The Little is dramatic. There is a little bit of dramatization in it, but her dissociative identity disorder seems to be part of the rare percentage of people who have overt dissociative identity disorder. So alters can be a bit more dramatic and be more outwardly showing, but she also trusts the person that she's more switching in front of. So it could very well be that it's a bit more dramatized and coming out more because she's comfortable with him. I also liked that not every alter she has communication with. When one of the alters came out, she explained to the other protagonist that she can't really communicate with the other alters, which is very accurate to some people with DID. It takes a lot of hard work to gain communication. I only have communication with about 5 of my alters out of about 100 of them. So it is very accurate to how long it can take and how much of a process it is to gain that communication and ability to talk with the other alters. She can communicate with her alters sometimes in dreams, which can be accurate to some systems. Some systems are a lot more active in sleep. It depends on the system. So in that front, I feel it is fairly accurate. Another thing that I really like is that the filmmaker, the person who made the film's brother, has obsessive compulsive disorder, a pretty severe case, and also the filmmaker's mother is a psychiatrist who specializes in dissociative identity disorder. So I think that really played a part in why the film was pretty well made and accurate, because there was a background and she spent a lot of time gaining the information and also had the living experience of her brother having a mental illness. So I think that played a very big part on how the film was made. A damaging sexual alter, there is an alter that is hypersexualized and can be impulsive and take out those sexual urges on the other protagonist, which, depending on systems, can be accurate. There can be issues with hypersexual alters having impulse issues. There's also a lot of cases of hypersexual alters not having those issues. It really depends on the case. And it also depends on what the system is going through and has been through. They have used a couple instances of the outdated multiple personality disorder, but recently I have learned that in other countries, and this film wasn't made in America, in other countries, they still use multiple personality disorder. And I think at this time in this country, they were still using multiple personality disorder, so I'm giving them some leeway on that because it really depends. It wasn't an American film. The couple, Grace and I didn't write down the protagonist names with the other one, which I apologize for. But Grace and the other main protagonist were very accommodating of each other's conditions. A big trigger of the protagonist with obsessive compulsive disorder were dogs. He had extreme germophobia and contamination OCD. And she was very accommodating of his OCD and finding ways to get around it and asking him if he was comfortable with things. And on the flip side, he was very accommodating of her dissociative identity disorder and finding ways to help with that too and making sure she was comfortable. Grace does touch on her inner world and it being a house. She was very descriptive of it, which I found to be very accurate because a lot of systems do have inner worlds. Some do, some don't. Depends on the system again. Every system is different. But she does touch on the inner world and how some of it works. And he had a tough time, the other protagonist with OCD. He had a bit of a tough time processing and understanding what an inner world is, which makes sense because if you don't have DID, it's really hard to grasp at times. I know when I was explaining my inner world to my partner, they had a hard time kind of grasping a world inside the head. So it can be difficult to explain to people, which I found to be another thing that was fairly accurate. Another one about the inner world is not every alter has access to it, which is another thing that I found to be extremely accurate. Those systems, DID and OSDD systems, who do have inner worlds, not every alter can access the inner world, depending on the system. Because it also ties into communication and amnesia barriers. It takes a lot of work to break down those amnesia barriers and gain communication and gain access to parts of the inner world in the head space. So that's another part that I really liked that they touched on. And then the last thing I really liked about that is system responsibility. There were times in the movie that Grace really did mess up. At one point she switched and she touched the protagonist's leg. Another time she switched out when she got hurt by what they said. And she got hurt by what they said and she yelled at them. She yelled at him. And she took responsibility for that. The host of all the system took responsibility for the bad behavior. They felt really bad about it and remorseful and deeply apologized to them. And also another thing that I liked is they tried to do better. She tried to make it up to him. She tried to figure out the behaviors and do better so she didn't have to be in that situation again, which is a very important part of system responsibility. Not only saying you're sorry, but working on things to make it better, which can appear in many ways. It could be deciding to work on it in therapy. It can be trying to find things on your own to make sure things don't happen again. Like if you have issues with spending money, maybe finding ways that someone could hang on to your card until you can make a purchase and be there with you, or be it if you do a very disrespectful behavior, going to therapy and asking your therapist or psychiatrist to help you cope with that and find coping skills. So system responsibility is a huge part of DID, and they really handled that part very well. So this is kind of a short episode, but again, trigger warning for it, especially in the area of domestic violence and hurt trauma. But you can find the film on YouTube. Just Google "What If It Works" on YouTube, and it should pop up. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's an Australian film. I do know that it is an American. So I think it was a very good representation of DID, and although there were a couple things that were iffy, I think it was handled very well. So that is one thing I would add to a very good representation of DID, and I would recommend, if you have the coping skills in place and spoons, I highly recommend Systems watching it. So this has been System Coral. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Bye.